Hello there. Thank you for coming to see me. Thank you for coming to visit my site. I'm sorry, however, that you have to be here. If I were to ask you to think back to the saddest period of your life, I mean, don't do this now, but if I were to ask you to do so, then you could bring yourself perhaps close to feeling just as you did back then. If I were to ask you to think back to the happiest moment of your life, if I were to ask you to close your eyes and imagine yourself back in that period of time, then you could take yourself back there, and you would even find yourself, I imagine, smiling faintly and that happiness starting to return. If I were to ask you to think back to the time when you felt most scared, most terrified, then again, if you got involved in that memory sufficiently deeply, you could recapture some at least of what it felt to be afraid. Every time you go to an exam, or perhaps you're here because you're scared of a driving test, or perhaps you're here because you're afraid that you're going to have too much nervousness in your system in a stage performance, a poetry reading, a dance competition, public speaking, whatever it is, you're suffering performance anxiety, and every time you imagine the next event, what you're doing is recalling the feelings associated with the past event, the last event. And what you're doing is you are creating an expectation that the next event is going to be just the same, if not worse. How awful to expect yourself to fail in that way. But as I've just explained, if you think back to a time in which you were happy, then you can recapture that feeling. If you think back to a time in which you were confident, then you can recapture that feeling. And some of what I would do with any person suffering performance anxiety is encourage them to think back to a time in which they felt in charge, they felt confident, they felt in control. And that client, that person, you can and will learn to harness that feeling and to carry it into the next event. Now, perhaps it's true to say that your first exam, your first driving test, your first stage performance was a disaster. Maybe it was just disappointing. It didn't live up to expectations, perhaps. It doesn't really matter now, does it? It's past. You hold on to those feelings and you create those expectations for the future, but it doesn't have to be that way anymore. You can learn to let those feelings, those expectations go. You can learn to have more self-acceptance, more self-esteem. You can learn to focus instead on what's positive about you. I mean, so many of my clients just focus in on what's negative, or what they perceive as being negative. They amplify, they make the failures enormous, and all the successes are shrunk down. Well, anyone could do that, couldn't they? Well, no. No one else can do that, because no one else can be you. And you can learn to make the best of you. And every year I see people taking driving tests, people taking exams, performers. I see 16-year-olds with their GCSEs. I see 21-year-olds with their finals, 35-year-old accountants with their finals, dancers, actors. I see sports people. That's the subject of my next video, sports performance. I see any number of people who fear the next time they are expected to perform to a certain standard and they fear they can't. I help them to remove that fear, to instill confidence. What's the best example I can think of? Oh, there was a medical student a few years ago. He panicked for every exam, and he was now about to take his exams which would decide whether or not he got to medical school, and he called me panicking just at the very thought of his exams. He lived too far away, unfortunately. I was only able to spend 20 minutes talking to him on the phone, but a few months later I got a big Amazon voucher. That was very kind of him, thank you, I didn't charge him. A big Amazon voucher from him and a card from his mother explaining how he'd aced his exams and he got into medical school and he was now on the path to fulfilling his dream. You could be too. Why not? What's stopping you apart from the fear of fear? There's nothing wrong with you. There's no reason why you can't achieve these things. You just expect yourself to fail, and so you become afraid of fear. There's nothing wrong with being nervous before a test or exam or a performance. It's only unhelpful when you become afraid of that nervousness and spiral it out of control. I can help you to reverse and undo and eliminate that process. So when you're ready, give me a call. You can call me on 07786 123 736. You could email me on, paul@resolvedhypnotherapy.co.uk. You could use the contact form at the bottom of this page. Give me a call, we'll have a nice talk about what's the matter and how I could help you. There are no guarantees, but I can almost promise you that you can learn to let this fear go. And it's certainly worth the price of a phone call to find out. Okay, well, I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye-bye.